everybody. We're just now opening up and letting everybody in. Welcome. We are so happy to see all of your faces today on Zoom, and people will continue to come in over the course of the next few minutes and as we get started. But we will jump right in to start on time. One thing we like to teach our students at Scholars of Finance and try to uphold ourselves. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. I hope you've been having a wonderful week, been safe, healthy. Thank you to all of you for joining us tonight for our National Speaker Series at Scholars of Finance. For those of you that are joining us for the first time tonight, welcome also. A special thanks. I'm Ross Overline. If we haven't met, I am the CEO and co-founder of Scholars of Finance, and I'll be your host today. At Scholars of Finance, our mission is to develop the next generation of finance executives who lead with character and integrity. Like many businesses, Scholars of Finance has pivoted because of COVID-19. And for one, we canceled our flagship event, the Leadership Symposia, which we were hosting in 4 cities, in San Francisco, New York, Minneapolis, Chicago. And we had to cancel all of them due to the moratorium placed on public gatherings. And in order to continue to enable our students, many of you on the line, to learn from top finance executives who lead with character and integrity, we launched this National Speaker Series. In the first few weeks, we've already had speakers like Deb Schoneman, the president of Piper Sandler, John Taft, the vice chairman of Baird, F. Martin, who's a former partner at Goldman and the co-founder of their high-tech business. We've had over 200 attendees join us so far. And tonight we are honored to have Bob Dahl join us to share his wisdom and insights. I had reached out to Bob a few weeks ago about speaking, and during our phone call, it was clear that Bob lives out our mission. And that's apparent in a variety of ways that you'll learn about today. And Bob has a passion for giving back and answering questions, teaching, and leading personally with character and integrity. So fortunately for all of us, over the next hour, he will share how he has been so successful in finance whilst upholding his core values throughout his career. We'll begin, as usual, by hearing from Bob for the first half of this hour, and then move into a Q&A session for the last portion of our time with him. Students, if you have a question that comes up, please raise your hand on Zoom. After doing this, you'll be added to a queue. So while Bob's talking, feel free to throw your hand up just to get your spot in line. Once we get to Q&A, I'll call on your name, just unmute your line and introduce yourself and ask your question or share your thoughts. Also, we normally host in-person events, so we want to encourage everyone to turn your video on and be prepared to unmute your mic later as well as we give Bob a warm welcome. And with that, I'll share a little bit about Bob and turn it over to you, Bob. So Bob Dahl, if you haven't already heard about Bob Dahl, which I'm sure many of us have, is a senior portfolio manager and a chief equity strategist at Nuveen. Bob manages 7 portfolios, including large caps and alternatives, and is a highly respected authority on the equities markets among investors, advisors, and the media. As the author of widely followed weekly commentaries and annual market predictions, Bob provides ongoing, timely market perspectives to the entire world. Prior to joining Nuveen, Bob held similar roles at other large asset management firms, including serving as the chief equity strategist of BlackRock. He was the president and chief investment officer of Merrill Lynch Investment Managers, and was also formerly the chief investment officer of the Oppenheimer Funds. Bob graduated with a bachelor's in accounting and a bachelor's in economics from Lehigh University, and has an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also a certified public accountant and holds the CFA designation from the CFA Institute. At Scholars of Finance, we like to open up all of our events by giving our speakers a warm welcome into our community. So please, if everyone could please unmute your lines, and let's give Bob a warm round of applause as he begins his talk. Bob, it's great to have you. And with that, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ross. I've done a number of these sort of things, meaning virtual meetings like this since coronavirus, but it's the first one I've heard applause, so thank you for that. So I thought I'd do several things in my few minutes of quote prepared comments. A little bit more of my background so you understand where I've come from and what my careers look like. Then I love lists, so I'm going to share 7 lessons that I am learning along the way, and then 10 beliefs on leadership, and then 3 pieces of advice. And I think I can get through that in a lot of time without too much trouble. So when I've spent my career in the stock market, as is clear from the introduction, but when I was in elementary, junior high, high school, college, I had no clue what the stock market was. I majored in math as I entered college because I was particularly facile with and enjoyed numbers. But by my sophomore year, some of you will identify, the only numbers in the textbook for that math course were the page numbers. Everything else were Greek symbols. I said, this isn't math. What I wanted to do, of course, was applied math or management science or operations research, which I found out over time. I graduated and headed into public accounting. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my career, so the advice I got was go see lots of businesses. So I spent 2 years in public accounting, and I saw big companies and little companies, profit, nonprofit, well-managed, not so well-managed, et cetera, et cetera. During my years between undergraduate and graduate school, was dating a girl whose father invested in the stock market. And as the story goes, I didn't fall in love with the girl, but I fell in love with the stock market. And the fascination it created for me. So this is my calling. This is what I'm going to do with my career. So I went and got my MBA with a focus in finance and investment management in particular, and graduated and been in the investment management business ever since. This is my, believe it or not, 40th year in the investment management business. And, there's still a lot of lessons to learn about life, a lot of lessons to learn about leadership, a lot of lessons to learn about investing. And I try to learn a little something new every day, and not make too many of the same mistakes twice, which I'm sure many of you are working on as well. As you heard from Ross's kind introduction, I've worked at, if you will, 4 places, or 4.5. Spent my first 7 years at Citicorp Investment Management, where I spent 2 years as a fundamental equity research analyst, then got a break to become a portfolio manager. I spent then 12 years at the Oppenheimer Funds, managing money, equity money, and was promoted while still managing money to head of equities, then chief investment officer. Was recruited to Merrill Lynch Investment Managers, which was the investment management business at Merrill Lynch. Was promoted to CEO of that business, but still continued to manage money. You see the pattern here. That was my trade. That was my interest. That was my reputation, if you will. And so while I had to delegate a lot of things to other people, which is part of leadership as well, especially in those years, I was CEO of that business for 5 years to the day when Merrill Lynch sold the asset management business to BlackRock, where I became the head of equities. So I had 13 years between Merrill Lynch Investment Managers and BlackRock, and now I'm in my 8th year at Nuveen, continuing to manage equity money. So you hear the boring refrain, managing equity money. Maybe a couple of words of why the stock market's of such interest to me. It's a combination of economics, finance, math, psychology, politics, and it's new every day. No day is the same as the day before. And you can read your score in the newspaper every day, as it were, which makes it all the more interesting to try to win. If you lose today, you pick up and you try to win tomorrow. So that's a little more of my background, which I hope is helpful in some ways, and maybe will prompt some questions. Let me move to the lessons I'm learning, and these will help you see what my life has looked like, what my careers look like, what my leadership journey has looked like. Number 1, focus on the best, sometimes at the expense of the good. Many of us have a high-class problem, where to spend our time, and we're constantly choosing between good and best things. I don't know what that means for you, but the good things are usually what my agenda is. The good things are usually what my to-do list suggests. The best things are sometimes very time-consuming, can be very disruptive to a schedule, and but the best things are often the most helpful to somebody, to a business, to a client, to somebody outside of your day-to-day business, and can be the most rewarding. So focus on the best, sometimes at the expense of the good. Number 2, live a heart-motivated life. Many, I suspect, that are on this call are type A's like me. And among the satisfaction you get is when you make your to-do list and you get it done. And then you pat yourself on the back with attaboy. There's nothing wrong with that. Getting stuff done is really good. But I constantly ask myself the question, how am I being while I am doing? That is to say, what kind of attitude do I have? How am I treating people? It's not only getting it done, but how do I get it done? I think that in life, that's as if not more important sometimes than the checklist and the doing. Number 3, get a grasp on the brevity of life. Now you might say, Bob, you're an old guy. You would come to grips with that sort of question. I'm a young person. What am I worrying about? Well, you're probably right in some sense. I turned 65 last year, and my father died at 66 of cancer as we watched him deteriorate. And, it won't be too many months before I reach the exact age my father was when he died. And, God could take me home today. It might be when I'm 90. But that reality has struck me. And I would add, in this period of coronavirus, I find a lot of people either directly or indirectly talking about that sort of thing. What about life? What am I doing here? Where am I going in the brevity of life? Number 4, and I'm still working on this one. Remember, it's not about you. It's not about me. I remember sitting in an airport one time and watching a gal kind of run down the corridor, and she had a t-shirt on. It said, "It's all about me." And I said to myself, at least she's being honest. I think most of us, we tend to put ourselves right at the front of the line. And look, there are times when you have to stand up for yourself. I'm not saying that. But the satisfaction in life and the purpose in life, I think, can be a lot sweeter if we remember it's not about us. Number 5, it's not the circumstances that define us, but how we react to those circumstances. Sometimes it's expressed as, I can't help what cards I've been dealt. I got to play my hand the best I can. You know that story. I've had the privilege of being dealt a lot of high cards in life. And so the question is, how am I reacting to that? Am I living up to that high calling, if you will? And we all have bumps along the road. I lost my job in the business at one point in time, and that was a gut-wrenching time for me. And I think how I responded to that was as if not more important than the fact that I lost my job. Look, lots of people lose their job. Lots of people lose a lot worse than a job. But I lost my job, and it was hard for me. I had a lot of lessons to learn from it. I didn't mention this earlier. I should have in my description. My view as a Christian worldview. I'm a Christian, and so the teachings of God in the Bible are, in my view, my guidebook to life. So number 6 speaks to that. God seeks to satisfy the deepest desires of our hearts. I believe when one walks with God and seeks after God and kind of tunes his or her heart to God's heart, God seeks to satisfy the deepest desires. And I've seen that in my life over and over and over. For example, when I lost my job, I had been saying, can I climb down from this job in some way, shape, or form? Because I was doing too many things. And back to, I didn't want to give up the money management. And I was doing all these management and leadership things on top of it. And my plate was more than full. Well, I think God said, Bob, I'm going to fix that for you, but not gradually. You're not going to climb down. We're going to do it like this. I can amplify. And number 7, live a life of worship. Now, there's a little English mistake there. All of us live a life of worship. The question is, what are we worshiping? What causes us to jump up and down and yell and scream in happiness and joy? And what causes us to cry? They're the things we worship, the things we really, really care about. I hope it's clear that for me, the thing I worship is a person. His name is Jesus. And I can amplify for anybody who's interested. So there's 7 lessons I'm trying to learn over time. Let me shift to the 10 beliefs on leadership. Now that you have a bunch of my background, I hope this is helpful in some way. Number one, teamwork, collegial interaction, and collaborative activity for a common bond for achievement. Most businesses, you got to work together. You got to figure out what the team looks like. Everybody brings a different set of strengths and weaknesses to a team, and a leader has to be able to take that team and mold it and fashion it and get the best out of it. Effectiveness and efficiency are two words that come to mind when I put that leadership belief on the table. Number two, quality in everything we do preempts quantity. I alluded to this in my comments before. How we get stuff done is as important as how much we get done. If you have clients in your business, they care about who you are and how you serve. You may get to an answer very quickly and have a big answer, but if you're not doing it the right way, they may not come back to you for the next problem or piece of business. Number three, execution supersedes intention. I don't know how often I said, you know, I worked hard this year to get my portfolio where I thought it should be. But if it's in the wrong place and our investment results aren't good, how do I expect my clients to reward me? How do I expect my company to reward me? So I got to get it right. Intentions are noble, but execution is key. Number four, the pursuit of excellence must be pervasive and unrelenting. We live in a competitive world, and many of you are in or will enter very competitive fields. And if you're going to stay at the top of your game, you have to pursue excellence in all kinds of ways. Re-educate, re-stimulate, work a little harder, listen better, improve and not make the same mistakes twice. I think I said that already. Number five, we will always benefit from critical review and a constant improvement. Sometimes I say it this week, we come to the office to make each other better. Most businesses, to repeat, aren't done by one person. It's a small group or a big group of people, and sometimes a multifaceted corporation. We can make each other better if we have open and honest communication and leave our egos at the door and have a dose of humility. Number six, individual rewards are tied to a performance meritocracy. Companies that say everybody gets the same bonus, to me, are not a whole lot of fun to work for. You want to work for a company that sets objectives at the corporate level, let's say the division level, the department level, the individual level, and these rewards are a piece of all of that. So if our division does better than the next division, we should get a couple of pennies more as in the reward scheme, if you will. Not that we become competitive with one another, that's going too far, but I hope you understand my balance. Seven, there are no higher ethical values than truth, honesty, and professionalism. I think part of what Ross is trying to do with this group of leaders he brings together is to demonstrate that in lots of different ways. You know, there are shortcuts one can take, and sometimes they're good because they're efficiency enhancements. Sometimes they're not so good because they can be shading the truth. They can be stepping on people. I think in the world in which we live, truth, honesty, and professionalism are becoming more important, thank God, rather than less important. Number eight, commitment, dedication, and hard work are instruments of success. I try to preach that in every leadership position I'm in. Another way to say that is enthusiasm makes average people extraordinary. You know, at the end of the day, we're all average. You know, we all average out to the average, if you will. But we can get an edge if we have a little more enthusiasm, if we have a little more commitment, if we have a little harder work. I always try as a leader to demonstrate that by leading by example, but ask of my subordinates the same thing. Number nine, enjoying ourselves and maintaining a pleasant working environment are important elements of our success. We spend more time working than about any other activity in life, at least in our waking hours. And if we don't enjoy the place we work, and we as employees and or leaders aren't trying to make it a place that people want to be part of, we're not going to be as successful. Companies that love working together tend to do better than companies that don't. And finally, number 10, this comes back to my worldview: follow the principles detailed by God in His Word and the Bible. The Bible has amazing lessons on leadership. And if you look at most books, secular books on leadership, the principles are taken from the Bible. So let me end my prepared comments with three recommendations. People often ask me, particularly at a young age like many of you, what would advice, Bob, would you give me? And I've got three things written down. Number one, nose to the grindstone. Be excellent at what you do. Dig deeper. People who are always networking and not getting the job done eventually are found out. You want to dig into what it is that you do. Don't take things personally. That happens all the time, unintentionally by people, but keep your nose to the grindstone. I never sought the next promotion. It always came my way because I put my nose to the grindstone and something good happened along the way. Number two, focus and follow through. It is easy to be diverted to focusing on 122 different things, and we're never really focused. Citicorp Investment Management, the first place I worked out of graduate school, we did what was called CFOs, critical few objectives. And we had to come up with 3 or 4 things for a calendar year. That's all, not 15, 3 or 4 that were lined up with the corporation's objective and sought after those. I would extend that to say, I learned this after a few years, if CFOs are good enough at work, aren't they good enough for life? So I would commend in your profession critical few objectives, work on a set every year and evaluate, but do the same thing in life. Number 3, love what you do and do what you love. Life is short. Work hours can be long. As I said earlier, we spend more time working than any other waking activity. And if we're not doing things we enjoy, something's got to change, because we'll become very disillusioned and not enjoy what it is that we're doing. My wife and I, we have 3 kids, and we've always said, find out your passion and pursue it. How have you been gifted? What are you interested in? How do those things come together and pursue it? Forget about the money. I mean, people, Mr. Dahl, if I went into this business or that business, where would I make more money? And I start by saying, I'll answer the question from my point of view, but that's the wrong question. The question needs to be, where am I going to take my giftedness, my interest set, combine them in a way that's going to give me a meaningful career? So, as I said, I like lists. There were 3 of them. I hope they were meaningful, beneficial in some way. And Ross, I see I've done about the allotted time, so I hope I get an A+ on that part of it.
Bob, thanks so much. I think you get an A++. Only 20 minutes exactly. So you even spared some efficiency and left some more room for Q&A, which is generally our students' favorite part of the session. I really appreciated your lists. Frankly, that makes it very, very easy to have takeaways from this and to act on those, especially the 3 pieces of advice: this nose to the grindstone, focus and follow through, love what you do and do what you love. I think all excellent principles. And having read dozens of books on leadership and management and productivity, reading that, I mean, a lot of what you learn boils down to those 3 things. So I appreciate kind of the profundity and the simplicity of that.
It took me 40 years to learn them.
I appreciate it. So with that, all of our students on the line, everyone on the line, if you want to ask a question, feel free to start raising your hand on Zoom. And there's some questions that were submitted by the audience in advance that I will start asking now in the meantime, just to get us warmed up. And I see Arvin's already got a question. First, we had a question coming from one of our students, Caleb. What is the best piece of advice you have received or learned, the single best piece of advice you have received or learned, and would offer to someone at 20?
Sure. Yeah, what pops into my head, I might have a better answer if I think a little deeper, is when I became a portfolio manager in the early days, I remember I had a mentor who said, Bob, don't lose sight of what it is that you are really good at and enjoy. And from what I can tell, that's managing money. He observed, he said, you're a kind of guy who's going to be drawn into lots of different positions. But if that's what you like to do, don't give up on it. Work hard at it, at keeping it. And he was right. And I remembered that along the way. There were many times, in fact, times when I got a promotion where my boss would say, Bob, who's going to manage your money? I said, well, I am. That's my trade, because I knew I wouldn't be fulfilled. I wouldn't be satisfied. I probably wouldn't be happy at the end of the day if I didn't have that outlet, if you will, which is the guts of the profession that I have been in and am in, despite management and leadership responsibilities around it. So maybe it's a long-winded way of saying, like what you do and do what you like one more time. But that piece of advice went through my head many times when the temptation could have been to move on and give up.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate it. It's a helpful reminder to do what we love and make sure that we're fulfilled, right? Because if we don't, it can become very challenging to focus, keep our nose to the grindstone, right? Produce, and be excellent. So that's really helpful. Arvind, I see you have a question. Do you want to go first and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Arvind Sriram. I'm a freshman at the NYU chapter. And first of all, thank you for coming to the speaker series. I really gained a lot of value from this lecture on leadership and advice for my future as I pursue a career in finance or whatever. But my question is, going back to your first point on leadership, how has the current circumstances of being in quarantine and what's going on with coronavirus affect your strategies for having optimal teamwork?
Arvind, it's been a surprise to me how well this medium has worked. I led a call earlier today, and we started, it was for 12:30, and we started at 12:30. In most environments, you got to wait for this one to show up and that one to show up, and you start meetings 5-10 minutes late. Meetings have been starting right on time, which I really appreciate, not to waste people's time. So yeah, in the early days, it was a little weird, a little difficult, but pretty quickly you find out that you can make it work. I would say this as an observation. People that you have worked with in your team face-to-face for a period of time, if you have to move to a medium like this or just a plain old conference call where you can't see each other, it works. The harder ones are where it's a team that's come together without having the benefit of having worked together face-to-face. I say that also by extension to people working on a team in different cities. If they've worked together face-to-face around the same table, gotten to know one another, and then they separate geographically, it's a lot easier to have good collegial teamwork than if they're just plopped there and didn't know each other before. So I guess what I'm trying to say is in this environment, those that I know and we know each other, it's been, just pick up right where we left off as opposed to having to be in the room together. I happen to work for a firm that is pretty geographically dispersed, so we're used to this in many ways.
Thank you.
Hope that's helpful.
That's great. And actually, I want to layer on an additional question, Arvind. I think it's a great question. Bob, one thing that I think a lot of us have heard or learned in leadership literature and management books is that building trust and building relationships is so critical for healthy teamwork and collaboration. Building on to Arvind's question, how do you go about changing your approach to building trust and investing in relationships now that we're not seeing each other face to face? How do you go the extra mile in conversation, with calls, et cetera?
Yeah, so it is harder. Let's acknowledge that right up front, which means we have to do more of it, meaning I communicate more. I don't assume that the next time we're in the room together, we'll just pick up. I give progress reports along the way. I find I'm calling people more often. How are you doing? How are you managing through this difficult environment? And most people appreciate that. Somebody actually cares about how I'm doing in this weird world in which we live. So more communication, maybe more empathy, a little more sympathy, try to have some humility, which encompasses all those things, if you will.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob. I really appreciate it. Sowan, I see you have a question as well. Do you want to go next?
Yes, I do. Hi, I'm Sawan. I want to first thank you, of course, for coming here today and taking time of your day to talk to us. My question just relates to, as I was listening to you speak, I couldn't help but relate when you were talking about how when you were in school and you weren't necessarily learning about the things that you wanted to learn about. And so I was just wondering what advice you would give to students who maybe want to learn more about the stock market and get that hands-on experience.
Yeah, so first of all, philosophically, I think back to my college days, and there were courses I had to take. Why am I taking this? I don't enjoy it that much, but you know what? It gave me a better rounded education. I may not have enjoyed the experience, but with 2020 hindsight, I'm kind of glad. I remember my first job, as I referenced between undergraduate and graduate school, was public accounting. I spent a year and a half as an auditor and 6 months as an accountant. Sorry, as a consultant. Those first 18 months, I didn't particularly enjoy. I had my red pencil, kept it sharp, tick, tack, tie, trace. That's what we auditors did. And, I didn't particularly enjoy the job. I knew I wasn't going to do it forever. And I learned a lot. When I step back and think of what did I learn as an accountant and an auditor, I learned financial statements. I learned what an inventory number means and what it doesn't mean. And as a result, I have a hopefully better understanding, maybe a healthy skepticism, and can ask better questions because of that. So there was a period of time, didn't like what I was doing so much, but boy, it has helped me. I think in finding out to the second part of your question about the stock market, there are lots of ways to do it. Follow it. Make some time to read the Wall Street Journal, to read Barron's. If you can take a course in investment management, many schools have an investment club. Become part of that. Create your own portfolio. It can be a paper portfolio, it can be a real portfolio. Get your fingernails dirty is another way to say it, and you can experience and learn about the stock market that way.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sowan. Mason, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, Mr. Dahl, I was curious, what are like the top 3 principles you think of when you're in your capital allocation process?
3 principles in the capital allocation process. 1, what's my objective for this portfolio? What's the client looking for? 2, what's my time horizon? The time horizon can really affect what it is you're doing with that capital. How short or longer term oriented are you? And maybe I should have started this one because I'm using creating a portfolio of equities. How does the stock that I'm considering adding to the portfolio complement what's already there? So I'm allocating new capital. Is it a me too? Do I have too many things in the portfolio that already look like the name I'm thinking of adding, or do they give me something that's different that gives me a better rounded portfolio? So there's some things that come to mind. I'm using that again as a stock picker and an equity investor, as opposed to somebody who's using capital to create something.
Awesome, thanks, Bob. Great question, Mason. Daniel, I saw that you were physically raising your hand on your screen. Do you want to ask your question next?
Yeah. I want to ask you a question with relations to the financial markets. So after 2008, we saw that the Fed came in to intervene in markets. And I just want to ask, what is the key thing we are missing in the markets, in finance, such that 3 months of a downturn could result in almost like a recession? Like, is there really a cause for you to have faith in these financial systems which have been built? And just to follow up, my second question is that why should we try to inject liquidity into the markets, in that you have companies which are performing badly? Why don't we leave them to like market forces to just filter out companies which are not good and companies which are good? Is it really demand and supply which causes these markets to move? So that's my question.
Wow, 2 great questions that really encompass all kinds of subjects. I'm sure I won't do them justice, but let me try in a couple of different ways. First of all, the stock market is a discounting mechanism. We can see the future in a sense better than any one of us. So I think about the recent stock market. The stock market went down 35% from its high on February 19th to its low on March 23rd. The fastest 35% drop in history, little more than a month. And it hit its low before we even started seeing bad news in the economy. We knew it was coming, but we hardly had any bad numbers. And since then, the stock market's mostly gone up, even as the economic news has gotten worse and worse. The stock market is a discounting mechanism. Now, the stock market is, and this is part of both your first and second set of questions, is looking at the policy stimulus and aid that we have seen. As you probably know, with the bill passed last week, we now have more than $3 trillion of fiscal aid and stimulus, which complements the $5 trillion of liquidity used by the Fed aimed at providing markets that function normally and beyond that for credit to flow. And so I might say it this way. We have an epic battle going on, not to over dramatize it. And the one corner, you've got this $8 trillion of stimulus. And the other corner, you have a collapsing economy and earnings. And most of the battles so far have been won by policy. And I believe policy will win the war. But we'll still hear from the reality of the difficulties in the market and the economy. And therefore, I think the stock market won't be straight up. It will have setbacks along the way. Why should we inject liquidity? Well, that is a complicated question and has many aspects of an answer. I'll try to leave the politics of it out, but instead speak to the economics. On Thursday, March 12, I remember vividly, I was in Phoenix, Arizona, and witnessed the bid-ask spread in the Treasury market begin to widen. That is the day, in my opinion, that the Fed got religion and said we need to provide liquidity for the functioning of markets. Had they chosen not to provide that liquidity, our system would have fallen apart. We could say the same thing, in my judgment, about 2008, when the Fed was slower to come to realize that without functioning markets, we don't have an economy. So the ultimate free market person might say, just let it go where it's going. We'd be in a depression right now, for sure. And so the trade-off between providing liquidity to get markets to function more normally and saying, let the markets take care of themselves, in my view, is the difference between the depression and not. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't consequences of providing that liquidity. If I add the fiscal policy to it, that $8 trillion, where is that going to come from? Who's going to pay for that over time? And we could go into long dissertations about what might happen there. So that's why the liquidity is provided, because without it, the system fails. Is that responsive to your question, or do you want to follow up?
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, I have this follow-up question. So it's a bit different, but kind of the same subject. I want to know, you gave one recommendation that one of the best ways we can be in finance is for us to practically do it ourselves. So I currently trade the foreign exchange markets, and in what I'm doing, there are certain things you learn from academics and certain things you see in the market, which at times you don't know what to believe in. So I trade currencies, and my currency portfolio is up more than 100% for 1 month. So I just want to know what is the kind of returns you have seen in the market? Like, what are some of the reasonable returns you have seen in the market? How would you advise any person to use leverage? Because I use quite a high leverage, but I'm able to really forecast my currencies well, and I still make returns. So in this regard, do I listen to what the mainstream is saying to try to model my investment ideas, or I do what works for me as a trader?
First of all, congratulations on the fantastic results. I wish I had portfolios that did that well. You're doing very well. It sounds like you're taking a little bit of risk in the leverage to do it. So be aware of that, because that can work in the other direction also, as you know. I guess that the best investors that I've observed over time do have a keen understanding of the mainstream. I'll call the mainstream the consensus. What is the consensus saying about a particular company? Let's say the consensus says the company is going to earn $3 a share. And you do your homework and you come up with $3 a share. There's no information there. There's no position to take. Instead, if you do your homework and you decide, I firmly believe this company's only going to earn $2 a share, and everybody else thinks it's $3 a share, now you have an amazing shorting opportunity. And the same thing if you guess $4 on the long side. So I guess what I'm saying is it's really hard, in my view, in the investment business, to do your homework and not understand the context in which it fits, but not to only pay attention to the mainstream, because then you're going to be a consensus investor. I hope that's helpful. Good luck to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. And thanks, Bob. Jake, I see that you have a thumbs up raised instead of a hand. You want to ask a question?
Yeah. I think it's because I'm the co-host. I can't do a hands up for some reason, but it'll do. Bob, my question's it's kind of related to Masons, and you talked about the principles that you use for deciding how to allocate capital. One thing that we do at SOF is we all go through what's called a leadership development program, and in that we go through what we want our values to be and what we value in our own lives, and then from that create a decision-making framework to use in our personal lives and our career. So I was wondering if you do something similar to that for yourself, or if not, what do you think about when you're trying to make a decision that is either it might question your values, it might be gray, or it's just a difficult decision to make?
Yeah, so great set of questions, Jake. Part of the CFO critical few objectives that I go through has what you say in mind. If one of my objectives isn't to do what I do with integrity, professionalism, honesty, humility, in my view, I'm missing an opportunity to serve well and to lead well. So yes, part of what it is that I do. Let me give you one, for example. I was working at a place at one point in time when the economy and the system became very difficult. We were heading to a big bear market, a big recession. And one of the companies that was a vendor to us had trouble. And the president of the company called me and said, they're selling some paper. How much of it are you going to put in your clients' accounts? And I said, on investment merits, I'm not going to go there. I remember when he called a second time and said, your colleagues are all doing it. How much are you going to put in your client portfolios? And I stood on principle again that this is not a good investment. I have a fiduciary responsibility to my clients. And while this vendor is a preferred vendor and I want them to do well, I can't, in good conscience, put that paper in my clients' portfolios. Well, thankfully, that piece of paper, thankfully for me and my clients, that piece of paper went to zero. So not investing in it was a good idea. I wonder to this day what would have happened had that investment turned out to be a great one and all my colleagues did it and I refused to, even as the president of the company was calling me, asking me how much I was going to. I felt the subtle pressure, maybe not so subtle. There's one where my integrity forced me to say, can't go there.
Great question, Jake, and thanks, Bob. I appreciate you sharing that story. I feel like my blood chilled just a little bit hearing it, envisioning standing up to a leader, standing up to a manager in that way, out of integrity and on principle. Yeah, it's good inspiration.
I would say, Ross, thankfully, despite being in this business as long as I have, I've not had those sorts of things very often. So I'm thankful for that. You might think in this business that happens all the time. Most people come to work and they put their pants on the same way you and I do, one leg at a time, and they're trying to, work an honest day for an honest wage labor, serve their clients and the company they work for best they can.
Thanks, and appreciate that reassurance for our students as well. I think finance, among a lot of our students, has got a challenging reputation. I've heard some students say, like, when they declare finance as a major or business as a major, they start to get sneers. I recall even myself, my senior year going into equity research, suddenly my morality was called into question. So it's helpful to hear that it's actually not that bad. And
yeah, there's no question it is cutthroat in the sense that it's very competitive. A lot of smart people go into finance for lots of reasons, but greed creeps in lots of people's attitudes and the whole me first thing. So yeah, you have to have your flag up, as it were, but it's not as dirty as a lot of people think.
Thanks, Bob. Will Powers, I saw you also physically raised your hand earlier. Do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you so much for being here today. I know we all really appreciate it. I'm sure we're all sitting at home too, so it's a great opportunity. My question, first of all, I'm a freshman at Princeton. The Princeton chapter started about a week ago, so we're all really excited to be a part of it and glad to have you here. So my question has to do with one of your personal values. You said it's not the circumstances that define us, but how we react to those circumstances. And in regard to that, you talked about how, like, we can't control what cards we are dealt, right? And it's how we respond to the cards that we are dealt that kind of defines us. My question is kind of about the former part of that phrase, that you can't really control the cards that you're dealt. I have, like, something that's been interesting in my life. Like, I always believe that like, most of what happens is in my control. So, like, I control the cards that are dealt to me, and like sometimes that puts a lot of pressure on me. And I see it with my peers as well, like trying to figure out where to draw the line between what cards we can control that, like, are put in our corner versus, like, what's out of our control. So I'm just curious, from your perspective, like, where do you draw the line between situations we put ourselves in and situations that are more inevitable, that we can't really deal with, that we have to respond to with,
Yeah, great set of comments and questions, Will. First of all, I live and work in Princeton, New Jersey. So we are, when you're at school, we are neighbors. Great town. Hope you agree.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So yeah, let me say it this way. The big things we are really not in control of. You are not in control of who your parents are. You're not in control of where you grew up. You're not in control of how many IQ points God put in your head, and that list goes on. Now, what we make of ourselves, given what we have, I mean, not everybody can get into Princeton University. You did, congratulations. So yeah, you can influence your circumstances by what it is that you do. I presume that you work pretty hard in high school, you did reasonably well, you probably test pretty well, and you're a good all around student. That's what got you in. So you did control some of those circumstances. I won't dispute that. But kind of the raw materials, not necessarily so. So yes, we should take the best combination of what it is that we are and have, and put ourselves in a position where we can do well for what it is we're aiming at, for how we were made, and the people around us. So you're right. There are some things that are on a fine line there. So take everything you can and put them in a position where you can best optimize that set of skills and interests and background and pedigree that you possibly can. I'm not saying we're all, at the same juncture when it comes to that. We are dealt different cards, but you can take your cards and play them well. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Sure, thank you. Makes sense.
It's a great question, Will. Bob, appreciate it. Appreciate the answer too. I think that's very insightful and helpful to remember, right? That even getting, tied up with what we do or don't control, just trying to simplify it, trying to hone in, at least just today in this moment, on what we can control is really helpful. James, I saw you also had a question. I wanted to give you the chance to introduce yourself and go ahead.
Thank you, Ross. And thank you, Mr. Dahl, for coming today. We really appreciate you here and your advice. My question for you is regarding a statement that you said a little bit earlier. You mentioned that it's really important to build the structure and the environment that everyone wants to come in and work in. What kind of advice do you have for us in building that environment when we get to leadership positions, and how we can kind of inspire the people around us to do their best work?
That's my books have been written on that subject, so I'm not going to do it justice. Maybe just a few observations. First of all, what is it that the organization is trying to do? That can help form what the environment is that you want to create. Next, what are the raw materials you have to work with? Who are the people that are already there? Who are the people that you as a leader might bring in, might hire from the outside, might promote from within? That's going to create the best environment you think appropriate for, again, what you're trying to achieve in the organization. I'm a big believer in diverse thinking. Some leaders surround themselves with yes men and women, people who are going to tell them what they want to hear. I don't think that's the best way to serve an organization, not the best way to lead. I want some people who think differently from me. They can be a pain, don't get me wrong, but boy, they can stimulate the thinking, and they can make you as the leader better than you would have been if you were surrounded by a bunch of yes men. So there are 3 or 4 principles that come to mind. I guess the last thing I would say is leadership is a process. It's not an event. In other words, when you create a team, that's the team that's going to be there forever. That's the team for the moment. And as organizational needs change, as your leadership evolves, as the strengths and weaknesses are manifest, you're going to make changes to that team, hopefully to make it a little better each step of the way.
Thank you.
Great question, James. Matt, I see you have your hand up as well. If you want to ask your question, go right ahead.
Yeah, I got a little guy in the background here, so apologize for that. But
he might have the better question, Matt.
He might, I've been trying to encourage him to put a shirt on and so forth today. So that's been the big challenge. Anyway, so I've been in finance for about 15 years. I've just gotten to know Ross. So I've been in this world for a little bit. I'm on the fixed income side for a reputable firm out of Chicago Performance Trust. You might know some of those guys, but you might know the name. Anyway, I was curious, in the hallways, in the break room, life is happening, and you're alongside either colleagues or you're alongside customers or clients. And, as a Christian, I'm just curious if you have maybe 1 or 2 stories that stand out in your career where you really come alongside somebody, and in a way we're able to, quote, maybe like love your business neighbor. I don't know if there's anything like that, but, I think that that stuff is happening, right? But it's happening sort of like in the hallways and sidebar. And so anyway, but I think it's an important thing to be aware of.
Great question. 2 things popped into my head, so let me just put them on the table. One is I remember vividly when BlackRock bought Merrill Lynch Investment Managers. Remember, we're being acquired and they're the new boss. So, what they say is going to go at the end of the day. I remember walking down the hall one day, and coming the other direction was one of my associates. Her name was Brenda. And Brenda said, Bob, how can you be smiling? I want to cry because they're changing everything. That was a teachable moment. I said, Brenda, 100 years from now, no one's going to remember who the CEO of Merrill Lynch Investment Managers, they may not even know who Merrill Lynch Investment Managers is or was. Maybe the same for BlackRock. What's important in this environment? And then I went on and gave a list of things. So there was a teachable moment, a coachable moment, a moment to calm somebody down that was particularly upset. So that is one thing that popped in my head. Another thing, back to what's happening in the hallways. Back to when I was doing too many things, spinning too many plates at the same time. I always had stuff to do. And I remember saying to my assistant, would you schedule at least 2 hours a week on my calendar as walk around time, where I would just walk the halls, interact with people, no agenda, just find out what's going on, pat them on the back, thank them for something, listen to a request they had or a better way to do things. That's how a lot of stuff gets done. And another thing I did that came out of that was what we called skip level lunches. I'll never forget. I would always meet with my direct reports, but the people below them had all kinds of interesting things to say. So once a month, I would have a skip level lunch where I would have, 6 or 8 of those folks, kind of 2 levels down and, let them open up about what's good and what's not good about the place so I could try as the leader to make it a bit better. So I hope those reflections are helpful to you.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And with 3 minutes left, I saw Ralph, you had emailed me, you wanted to ask a question. I'm going to unmute you. If you want to ask a really fast question, go right ahead and we'll wrap up after that.
Hi, Bob. This is Ralph Akampora. How are you?
It is so good to see you, Ralph.
Been many years, buddy.
Oh, my goodness. So good to see you.
I can't thank you enough for the commentary you gave to all of us today. It's so apropos. I have one question I was going to ask that you kind of alluded to before. Wall Street is getting such a bad rap these days. It really hurts me to hear people say, well, anybody in Wall Street, they're too selfish, they're impersonal, and they're greedy. And Bob, I've been in business 53 years, and I've met the nicest, the brightest, the most generous people. It really hurts me to hear what they're saying today.
I totally agree with you. And part of what I would say, Ralph, is because you are one of the brightest and one of the nicest, you attract people like that to yourself, and that brings the best out in people, which is a great principle of leadership, as you well know. If you're nice to people, there's a better chance they're going to be nice back to you. And you're absolutely right. Wall Street gets a bad rap. You and I both have met over the years some people who are bums, but we've met a lot of people who are really great people trying to do good for the responsibilities and opportunities they've been given. And you're one of them. And I hope people would say that about me too.
Great. The other one. Keep up the good work, Bob. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ralph. Thanks, Bob. Bob, with that, everyone will move to close. Might just go a minute over. Really quickly, Bob, one thing we like to do for our guests to give you a souvenir, we take a group screenshot. So you have this to walk away with. So everybody, if you're comfortable, feel free to turn on your video or turn it off if you prefer not to be included. And Jake will give us a 1, 2, 3 countdown. We'll take a photo and then close with some wrap-up remarks.
All right, we'll do it on 3, everybody. So smile on 3. Everybody ready? All right, 1, 2, 3. All right, I got it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. Bob, we'll send that to you and we'll send that out to everybody as well. I've got to say, we're so grateful, Bob, for you sharing all of your insights and wisdom on leadership, on how to serve others, on how to inspire goodness, how to live in accordance with your values. We'll walk away with those 3 lessons. Keep our nose to the grindstone, to focus and follow through, to love what we do and do what we love, and to be good to others, right? To treat others well and to try to serve them. With that, for professionals and executives in the call, Bob, yourself included, if you'd like to get more involved with Scholars of Finance, whether as a mentor or a speaker, you should see a follow-up email in your inbox now or any moment with ways you can get involved. And to our students, as always, you'll see an email in your inbox with a survey, just with a handful of questions. Takes no more than 3 minutes to fill out. One of you will get a $20 gift card for your feedback. On to some exciting news and an invite I want to extend to everyone. We are honored next week to be hosting two of our advisors for Scholars of Finance, Matt Collier, a founding partner at Ramp Catalyst Network, and Tony Paquette, a business unit leader at SoFi, to talk about mentorship. Drawing from their experience across firms like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Bain, McKinsey, they will share how to find mentors, how to build relationships with mentors, how to learn as much as possible from them, and even for those of you executives on the call, to how to be a great mentor. And that will be next Thursday, May 7th at 4 p.m. So mark your calendars and look out for the invite. Bob, we'd love to have you too if you can make it. Thank you again for your time, Bob. We would love to have you back again, share more of your insights and experience. And everybody, if you want to unmute your lines, we'll give Bob one last digital round of applause, his second in his life. Bob, we are very, very grateful for your time. Everyone, we hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Ross. Wonderful opportunity. Appreciate it. All the best,
Thanks,
everybody.
Bob.